The air was already thick with heat that morning. The kind that pressed against your skin before the sun even cleared the tree line. At 7:42 a.m. on August 17, 1943, Technical Sergeant James McKenna crouched beneath the wing of a P-38 Lightning at Dobodura airfield in New Guinea, wiping oil from his hands as he watched his pilot climb into the cockpit. Lieutenant Robert Hayes was just 23. 6 combat missions, 0 kills, and if the odds held, he probably wouldn't come back from this one. 18 Japanese Zeros were reported airborne that morning, fast maneuverable, merciless. The kind of fight the P-38 was never built to win. McKenna knew the airplane as well as anyone alive. Twin engines, twin booms, 400 miles an hour in level flight, a monster in a dive. But he also knew its secret weakness, the one flaw that kept killing good men. The Lightning couldn't turn with a 0. Every American pilot knew the rule: don't dogfight them. Use speed, use altitude, dive, fire, and climb away. Never turn. Doctrine was clear. But war didn't care about doctrine. The Zeros baited them into horizontal turns again and again, then sliced inside those wider American arcs and tore them apart from behind. 37 Lightnings had gone down in the past 6 weeks. McKenna had signed the maintenance logs for many of them. He'd watched the pilots walk out, confident and laughing, and never return. Every report said the same thing: pilot error. Every officer blamed the men in the cockpits. But McKenna knew better. The problem wasn't the pilots. It was hidden under their feet. Inside the booms, a pair of aileron control cables ran the length of the aircraft. Pulleys, brackets, guide tubes, all standard. But the tolerances were wrong. Not catastrophically wrong, just enough to matter. Barely 3/8 of an inch of slack. It didn't sound like much, but in a turning fight at low altitude, the delay between the stick moving and the aileron responding could be the half-second between life and death. He'd told the engineering officer months ago. The answer had come back in the same clipped tone every enlisted man recognized. Within factory specifications, the numbers were fine. The paperwork was fine, so nothing changed. The manual was sacred even when the manual was killing people. That morning, McKenna made a decision that would break regulations, void warranties, and, though he didn't know it yet, rewrite air combat across the Pacific. He took a 6-inch length of piano wire from a wrecked aircraft, bent it into a Z, and installed it on the left aileron cable as a makeshift tensioner. 8 minutes of work, less than half a pound of added pressure. No slack left. No one saw him do it. The inspection crew was checking fuel and ammunition, not control tension. McKenna closed the access panel, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and watched Lieutenant Hayes climb the ladder into the cockpit. Hayes looked young. Everybody did out there. But there was something hollow behind his grin. The same look McKenna had seen on men who'd started counting missions like they were borrowed days. As the P-38's twin Allisons roared to life, McKenna stepped back, squinting through the heat shimmer. The aircraft rolled down the runway, lifted into the pale tropical sky, and vanished toward enemy airspace. McKenna stayed where he was, staring at the empty strip long after the sound faded. He didn't tell anyone what he'd done. He'd lost too many pilots already. The first was Lieutenant David Chen, a quiet kid from Sacramento who talked about fixing cars before the war. 3 weeks in theater, gone on a routine patrol. He'd come back once with bullet holes stitched across his boom and said the airplane just didn't respond when he needed it to roll. "It's like there's a delay," he told McKenna, "like she's asleep at the stick." He'd survived that one, barely. 3 weeks later, he didn't. Then there was Captain William Morrison, 11 kills to his name, one of the best. Morrison knew the Lightning's limits. He respected them, but even he couldn't fight the delay. Over Oro Bay, his controls went mushy in a split-S maneuver. 2-0 stayed with him through the roll. He never pulled out. The wreckage burned for 2 hours. The reports always said pilot error. But McKenna and the other mechanics knew better. They could hear it in the cables, the sound they made when you plucked them during inspection. Tight ones rang sharp like a guitar string. The P-38s in theater all sounded dull. The tone was wrong. With inspec, sure, but wrong. The night before this mission, Hayes had come to find him in the hangar, his face pale and tired. He didn't ask for a miracle, just a chance. "Can you make it roll faster?" he said. "Anything. I don't care if it's by the book or not." McKenna had looked at him for a long moment, then told him to come back in the morning. He'd see what he could do. That night, when the airfield went quiet, McKenna stayed. The hangar lights buzzed. Moths circled in the glare. He opened the left boom's inspection panel, feeling the warm metal under his hands. The cable sagged slightly when he tugged it. 3/8 of an inch. The number that haunted him. He took the piano wire and bent it with pliers until his thumb split open and bled. He didn't stop. The wire fought back, spring steel, stubborn as hell, but eventually it gave, curling into the Z shape he needed. 8 minutes later, he had a tensioner that looked crude but solid. Installing it meant disconnecting the cable, which meant removing a clevis pin the size of a thumbnail inside a space barely big enough for one hand. He dropped it once, swore under his breath, searched the darkness with trembling fingers until he found it again. When the pin finally slid back into place, he pulled on the cable. No slack, none. The ailerons moved the instant he touched it. For the first time, the controls felt alive. He cleaned the blood from the wire, replaced the panel, and leaned back against the fuselage, exhausted. Outside, the jungle was black and wet with the sound of insects. Somewhere in the distance, he heard the thrum of Japanese engines and wondered if he'd just saved a man's life or signed his own court-martial. He didn't sleep that night. At dawn, Hayes returned. The sky was pink over the mountains, and the airfield shimmered with heat even before breakfast. McKenna stood by the line, hands stuffed in his pockets as Hayes walked to the lightning. Neither man said a word. The engines fired. The prop wash blew dust into McKenna's face as the aircraft taxied away. He watched it lift off and climb until it became a speck against the sun. Then he waited. 17 minutes later, everything changed. At 8:14 that morning, 4 P-38s climbed over the Huon Gulf, sunlight flashing off their silver wings as they formed into attack position. Lieutenant Robert Hayes flew number 3 in the flight, his hands steady on the controls, eyes scanning the sky ahead. Below, 18 Japanese Zeros crossed the coast, climbing to intercept. The radio crackled. Bandits, 12 o'clock high. Hayes's element leader gave the order. Break dive, hit 'em fast. The P-38s rolled over and dove from 14,000 feet. The airframe shuddered as the lightning picked up speed, the engines screaming in perfect sync. Hayes lined up on a 0 at the back of the formation. He squeezed the trigger. 4 50 caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon roared, spitting tracers that curved through the blue. The 0 flinched, rolled right, and dove. Hayes followed. That's when it happened. The P-38 responded instantly. No delay, no lag, no sluggishness in the roll. The aircraft moved like it was reading his thoughts. He snapped left, then right. The airplane followed so perfectly it startled him. He'd never felt a lightning handle like this before. The 0 was still in front of him, trying to scissor away. Hayes rolled into the turn and fired again. The tracers walked up the 0's fuselage and tore through the cockpit. The enemy fighter burst into flame and spiraled down, a black smear across the jungle below. Hayes barely had time to breathe before another call came over the radio. 3 on your tail. He looked back. 3 Zeros, diving fast. Instinct said climb, gain altitude, stay fast. Doctrine said never turn with them. But doctrine hadn't saved Parker or Morrison. Doctrine was what got men killed. Hayes slammed the throttles forward and rolled hard left. The P-38 snapped around, sharper and faster than any Lightning he'd ever flown. The lead 0 overshot, its pilot unprepared for how quickly Hayes had reversed. Hayes pulled lead and fired a 2-second burst. The rounds hit square in the wing root. The 0 disintegrated in a flash of fire. The remaining 2 Japanese fighters tried to scissor, alternating turns to force him into an overshoot. Hayes stayed tight, his Lightning pivoting through the air like it had shed half its weight. Every time they turned, he was already there, matching their moves, sliding inside their radius. 1 0 snapped too hard, bleeding speed. Hayes cut across the turn and opened fire. The round struck home. The enemy aircraft broke apart, fragments spinning past Hayes's canopy so close he felt the thuds of debris against his right boom. 3 kills in under a minute. The 4th 0 fled toward the clouds. Hayes didn't chase. He leveled out, breathing hard, hands shaking on the controls, his instruments blurred with sweat in his eyes. He'd been in the air less than 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. At 9:03, his P-38 rolled back onto final approach at Dobodura. McKenna was already there, waiting on the tarmac, hands black with oil. The Lightning touched down, tires screeching. Hayes taxied in, shut down the engines, and climbed out. His flight suit drenched, his face streaked with grime. He looked at McKenna, eyes wide and disbelieving. "It worked," he said simply. The two men stood there for a moment, engines ticking as they cooled, the jungle humming all around them. McKenna didn't answer. He just nodded, staring at the aircraft like it had come back from the dead. But the story didn't end there. Captain Frank Mitchell, flight leader of the 475th Fighter Group, had seen the entire engagement from altitude. He'd watched Hayes's Lightning roll and turn like no other P-38 in the theater. The movement was too sharp, too precise. Mitchell had been flying the Lightning for over a year. He knew what it could and couldn't do. And what he'd just witnessed wasn't supposed to be possible. When the formation returned, Mitchell went straight to the debriefing tent. Hayes was still riding the adrenaline high, hands trembling as he wrote out his combat report. 3 confirmed kills. Mitchell leaned over him. "What did you change?" he asked. Hayes blinked. "Nothing. My airplane felt different today. Faster to roll. More responsive," Mitchell frowned. "Who worked on it last?" "McKenna," Hayes said. "Talk to McKenna." 2 hours later, Mitchell found the sergeant in the maintenance area, grease-streaked and exhausted. McKenna looked up from under another P-38's wing. "What did you do to that plane?" Mitchell asked. McKenna hesitated. He could have lied. Could have said he just checked the hydraulics. But he was too tired for lies. "I fixed what Lockheed didn't," he said quietly. Then he told Mitchell everything. The piano wire, the Z-bend, the slack, the night in the hangar. When he finished, Mitchell didn't scold him. He didn't threaten a court-martial. He just asked, "Can you do it to mine?" That night, McKenna did. By dawn, Captain Mitchell's Lightning had the same hidden modification. 1 6-inch piece of salvaged wire, invisible to anyone who didn't know where to look. Mitchell flew it the next morning. When he landed, he walked straight to McKenna, grinning like a man who'd just cheated death. "It's like flying a different airplane," he said. "Like she's alive." Word spread fast. Pilots started whispering in the ready room, asking their crew chiefs if they'd heard about McKenna's fix. Some refused. They weren't about to break regulations for rumors. But others had lost too many friends to rules that didn't work. They tried it. By August 20th, 9 aircraft at Dobodura carried the unauthorized modification. No paperwork, no inspection reports, just quiet work under cover of night. Mechanics learned the process from one another, bending the piano wire by hand, hiding the evidence under access panels before dawn. The results were impossible to ignore. On August 22nd, Hayes shot down 2 more zeros. On the 25th, Mitchell got 3. Other pilots began returning with kills after months of frustration. In July, the kill ratio had been 2 P-38s lost for every 0 destroyed. By late August, it was nearly 1-to-1. The engineers couldn't explain it. The officers didn't even know it was happening. The maintenance crews simply removed the tensioners before inspections and reinstalled them afterward. Pilots called it the wire fix. McKenna called it nothing. He just kept doing his job, and far to the north, Japanese pilots began to notice something strange. Reports filtered back through the 11th Air Fleet. American Lightnings were turning tighter, rolling faster, reversing quicker. The old tricks, baiting them into turns, cutting inside, weren't working anymore. Aces who had flown since Pearl Harbor were suddenly getting outmaneuvered by the heavy twin-boom fighter they'd once mocked. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's most celebrated aces, experienced it firsthand on September 3rd. He caught a lone P-38 over WWII and executed his favorite tactic, a feint, a roll then a reversal to get inside the enemy's turn. He knew the timing by heart. But when he reversed, the American fighter reversed with him, perfectly synchronized like the pilot had anticipated his move. For a heartbeat, Sakai saw the P-38's nose flash silver in his canopy before tracers ripped past his wingtip. He dove away in disbelief. The Americans hadn't changed their tactics. They didn't need to. The airplane itself had changed. What the Japanese couldn't see was that the difference wasn't in the engines, the guns, or the armor. It was hidden deep in the control system, a 6-inch piece of piano wire that had rewritten the rules of the Pacific Air War. By mid-September, the kill ratios flipped. P-38s were now outkilling zeros for the first time. The balance of the sky had shifted, and not a single officer in Washington or California yet knew why. By early September, Word of the mysterious wire fix was spreading beyond Dobodura. At Gusup Nadzab and Port Moresby, other ground crews started hearing whispers from pilots transferring in from the 475th and 49th fighter groups. They said there was a mechanic who'd figured something out, something small, simple, but powerful enough to change the way the Lightning flew. Most didn't believe it at first. Pilots were superstitious. Mechanics even more so. Every squadron had its share of stories, charms, tricks, rituals. But this one was different. It wasn't luck. It was results. At Gusup, a crew chief named James Watkins tried the modification on one of his P-38s after a pilot swore it had saved his life. Watkins didn't expect much. 8 minutes of work. One bent piece of piano wire installed between the aileron cable and its pulley housing. He tightened it, checked the control surfaces, and signed off the log without saying a word. The pilot took off the next morning. He came back an hour later, grinning ear to ear. His first confirmed kill after 8 weeks of frustration. Watkins modified 4 more aircraft before the week was over. By mid-September, at least 40 Lightnings across New Guinea carried the same secret. Nobody talked about it officially. The engineering officers had no idea. The mechanics removed the wire before inspections, then reinstalled it afterward. It was an unspoken conspiracy, an act of quiet rebellion that kept men alive. The numbers told the truth long before the paperwork caught up. In July, P-38 squadrons were losing 2 aircraft for every 0 they shot down. By August, that number had fallen to nearly even. By September, the Lightning had the edge. And somewhere in Tokyo, Japanese analysts began asking questions. Pilots from the 11th Air Fleet reported strange encounters. American Lightnings rolling faster, turning tighter, reversing quicker. The Zero's edge in maneuverability, the one advantage Japanese doctrine had relied on, was slipping away. At first, commanders dismissed the reports. Mechanical failure, pilot inexperience, coincidence. But then the combat losses began to climb. 38 Zeros gone in September alone, numbers they hadn't seen since 1942. Japan's most experienced aces began dying in fights they should have won. Tactics that had worked flawlessly for years were suddenly getting them killed. The shift was small, fractions of a second, inches on a turning radius, but in air combat, fractions are everything. The Americans hadn't built new aircraft. They hadn't introduced new engines or weapons. The difference was invisible, buried inside the booms of a handful of planes. A tiny piece of wire that nobody outside those dusty New Guinea airstrips even knew existed. By the end of September, Japanese command issued a quiet directive: avoid engaging P-38s unless in superior numbers. For the first time in the Pacific, the Zero had lost its dominance. And back in the humid maintenance area at Dobodura, Technical Sergeant James McKenna just kept working. He didn't know any of that. He only knew that the pilots he saw every morning, Hayes, Mitchell, Watkins, were coming back more often than before. But secrets don't stay buried forever. In October, a routine maintenance inspection uncovered the tensioners. An officer at Dobodura noticed inconsistent cable readings across the squadron. He ordered a teardown, found the piano wire inserts, and filed a report. It went up the chain of command to the 5th Air Force headquarters. From there, it reached the Army Air Force Engineering Command. The report didn't accuse anyone directly, but the implications were clear. Unauthorized modifications to flight control systems. A violation of military regulations. The irony was painful. The very thing that had saved dozens of lives now threatened the career of the man who'd made it possible. The command couldn't ignore it, but they couldn't dismiss the results either. The numbers were undeniable. Squadrons with the modification had higher kill ratios, lower losses, and pilots reporting better handling characteristics. So they sent engineers. In November, a Lockheed team arrived in New Guinea. Clean uniforms, fresh notebooks, and that distant, factory floor confidence that field mechanics always hated. They tore down 3 aircraft, measured the tension, analyzed the wire, ran stress calculations. And when they finished, their conclusion was simple. The modification was safe. More than safe, it was brilliant. It should have been there from the beginning. Lockheed quietly integrated a similar system into the new P-38J model that rolled off the production lines that winter. No fanfare, no credit. Just an engineering update buried in a technical bulletin. McKenna's name never appeared. Officially, The improvement came from field observations and subsequent engineering analysis. Unofficially, everyone in the 475th knew who had fixed the Lightning. Robert Hayes survived the war. 63 combat missions, 11 confirmed kills. He went home to Iowa in 1945, married his high school sweetheart, raised 4 children, and spent nearly 4 decades flying crop dusters over the same fields he'd grown up in. Every year on August 17th, he called McKenna, just to say thank you. Frank Mitchell made it home too. He became a squadron commander, led his men through the Philippines campaign, and retired from the Air Force as a colonel. Whenever he met young officers, he told them the same story, about a mechanic who saw what engineers missed and broke the rules to save lives. McKenna stayed in uniform until 1946. Then he went home to California, opened a small garage in Long Beach, and spent the rest of his life fixing cars. When people asked about the war, he just smiled and said he'd been a mechanic. Fixed airplanes, that's all. He never mentioned the wire. In 1991, almost 50 years later, a military historian researching field modifications found the story buried in maintenance logs from New Guinea. He tracked McKenna down, 73 years old, still working part-time in his garage. The historian told him how many pilots the modification had likely saved. McKenna just shrugged. "I didn't count," he said. "I just remember the ones who came back." James McKenna died in 2006 at the age of 88. His obituary mentioned his service in World War II. It didn't mention the piano wire, or the hundreds of men whose lives were changed because of it. But in a small office at the back of that Long Beach garage, there's still a photograph hanging on the wall. A young man in grease-stained coveralls, standing beside a P-38 Lightning under the tropical sun. The date scribbled on the back reads August 1943, New Guinea. That photograph is all that's left of one of the quietest revolutions in aviation history, because sometimes innovation doesn't come from the design floor or the boardroom. It comes from a tired sergeant bleeding from his hands, working by flashlight in the middle of the night, doing what needs to be done, even when no one gives him permission. That's how wars are really won, not by orders, not by doctrine, but by the people who refuse to accept good enough when lives are on the line.